Despite it being the fan favorite of the Harry Potter movies, The Prisoner of Azkaban is riddled with mistakes and errors that contradict the original story in the book. This doesn't mean that the movie is bad. Like I said, it repeatedly is selected as the favorite amongst fans. But it does mean that a large group of Harry Potter lovers will never learn what really happened during Harry's third year. People who have never read the book or simply forgot what was in it miss out on key characters who were cut from the movie, classes that never got the screen time, and key plot points that were deemed less than worthy of the final film. And maybe most importantly, the movie changed the magic of the wizarding world by revising crucial elements of the lore. So join me today as I reveal 17 facts and mistakes that you probably missed in the Prisoner of Azkaban movie. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 36 of Movies vs. Manuscripts Harry Potter Edition. This is the show where I take the Harry Potter movies and compare them to the original books to find all the differences along the way. Before we go any further, I wanted to give a shout out to this commenter from a previous episode. Each week, I highlight one of the top comments from a past video, so be sure to share your thoughts down below when you're done watching. Per usual, I'll cover all the changes across the 4 major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But for today's video and facts, we're specifically pulling from a set of scenes which correspond to the chapter Grim Defeat in the book. So before we jump into the analysis and the mistakes, let's refresh our memory on what happened during these scenes in the movie. Picking up from where we last left off, we see Hogwarts being secured as the front door locks and Dumbledore gets reports from Filch, Flitwick, and Snape that the different parts of the castle have been searched. Harry then eavesdrops as Snape tries to warn Dumbledore about the way that Sirius Black could have snuck into the castle, and then Snape suggests warning Harry about the danger. We then cut to the next day as we see the students in Defense Against the Dark Arts class, and Snape walks in. Harry questions him about where Lupin is, but Snape says that it's none of his business, and then tells them to turn to page 394 of their textbooks. Hermione then appears and tells Snape that they aren't meant to start werewolves for weeks. But Snape continues on, and after another Hermione interruption, he takes 5 points from Gryffindor. The scene ends with Draco sending a note over to Harry, which is a picture of Harry playing Quidditch in a storm, and on that note, the movie cuts to the Quidditch match itself. We see Harry flying around in a brutal thunderstorm, and eventually he spots the Hufflepuff Seeker chasing the snitch and darts after him. The Hufflepuff Seeker gets electrocuted and falls backwards, but Harry presses on. However, as he gets up into the clouds, he sees the figure of a dog silhouetted by the lightning, and then he shrugs it off and flies after the snitch once again. But before he can get to it, he feels a cold coming on and gets attacked by Dementors, who are flying about in the clouds, and because of this attack, he falls off of his broom and plummets to the ground. Thankfully, Dumbledore is there to save the day, and from the stands he raises his hand to use Arresto Momentum to slow Harry's fall. We then cut to Harry waking up in the hospital wing with his friends and the Gryffindor team around him. They tell him the bad news that they lost, and then also show him his destroyed broomstick. And on that depressing note, our scenes end for this week. So now that you've got an idea of the movie's version in your head, let's go into our first 3 categories of characters, timeline, and location, which are pretty easy this week. First, for characters, we're only missing a few, and they are Peeves the Poltergeist, Sir Cadogan the annoying yet brave painting, Percy Weasley, Oliver Wood, and the rest of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, and Cedric Diggory. Also, Parvati Patel and Dean Thomas get a couple lines here and there. But back to Cedric, you did hear me right. In the movies, we don't meet him until the Goblet of Fire, but in the books, Cedric was introduced during this game as the captain of the Hufflepuff team, and their Seeker. But we'll talk about that more during the plot changes. As for timeline, things actually line up quite well this week, so this category gets a pass. Again, most of the critical changes for this episode are in the plot, which we'll get to in a moment. But lastly, for these 3 categories, we have location, and once again, the book is much more rounded in terms of where we go in the castle. J.K. Rowling always did a good job of detailing Harry's life all around the school, and not just in the main sets that we see in the movie. That being said, we once again miss out on Gryffindor Tower, specifically Harry's dorm, and we don't see the Great Hall, at least in the way that we're supposed to. We do see the Great Hall as they sleep in it overnight, which does happen in the book, but most of the chapters in the book also include 1 or 2 meals, and we rarely ever see those in the movie. Lastly, we miss out on McGonagall's office, but that's a small moment that we'll cover in the plot changes. Honestly, these omissions are ones that I don't really mind, and they don't have much of an effect on the story. What really changes the plot, characters, and the wizarding world as a whole are the 17 revisions that the movie made, which we're going to cover next. Hey, it's Gibby here from the future, and I've got a super cool announcement. I have just launched a Patreon. That means that now you can explore the Wizarding World and Middle-earth with me on a whole new level. But just to be clear, my videos are and will always remain free to watch here on YouTube. This is simply a way for those of you who want to and are able to support me and the channel in creating consistent content every month. And in return, you get some awesome perks like monthly live streams, shoutouts and videos, early access to every episode of Movies vs. Manuscripts, and even merch for select tiers. I am still building out the Patreon and adding and removing perks here and there as we grow and I figure out what you guys really want, but I'm excited to see how this community grows on that platform. You can check the pinned comment or the link in the description to join today. But now let's get back to the video. Alright, so now let's head into the plot changes, which will include every omission, revision, and mistake the movies made when adapting this chapter from the book. To start, our first change is an omission regarding Harry's night in the Great Hall after Sirius Black's attack on the Fat Lady. In the book, we read that the head boy and girl, along with all the prefects, were set to keep watch on the entrances to the Great Hall, and teachers came to check on the students about every hour. But before the lights go out and the students go to sleep, the book has a brief moment of Harry, Ron, and Hermione all grouping their sleeping bags together, and then talking about what had happened. All the students around them were talking as well, with the main subject being, how did Sirius Black get into the castle? Some people say he flew in, and some say he apparated, but ultimately Hermione tells the boys that she must be the only one who's ever read Hogwarts: A History. Then she goes on to explain that Hogwarts has magical protections that prevent people from apparating or just flying in. Plus, Dementors are guarding every entrance to the school grounds. After this bit of talking, Percy, who is head boy if you didn't know, turns out the lights and tells the students to stop talking and go to sleep. And although our trio doesn't talk, they all remain awake until late into the night. Which brings us to change number 2, which is that Percy actually talks with Dumbledore. In the movie, we just see Filch, Flitwick, and Snape reporting to the headmaster about their searches, which by the way are moved around in the movie, but I won't go into that now. And then after their reports, Snape talks to Dumbledore. But in the book, Dumbledore comes and checks on the students at about 3 a.m., and Percy is still awake, taking his job very seriously. Percy then asked Dumbledore if they had found anything, and Dumbledore replied no, and he didn't really expect Black to linger. Percy then inquired about the Dementors, asking if they had offered to help, but very firmly Dumbledore told him that they did, but as long as he is headmaster, Dementors would never enter the castle. This comment shut Percy up, and I think it's the first sign of how Percy is different from Dumbledore and not a fan of all of his methods. As we know from later in the series, Percy tends to lean more on the ministry side of things, and I am sure if Fudge were involved in this moment, he would have had the Dementors search every inch of the castle. Our final change for this part of our scenes with the students sleeping in the Great Hall is another small thing, but I think important for Snape's character development, and that is that in the book, Snape doesn't bring up warning Harry. In the movie, this almost seems like Snape being on the softer side and trying to look out for Harry, but in the book, he is still the cold professor we've known since the beginning. And after Dumbledore's final word about no one inside the castle helping Black, Snape shuts up and stops talking. Next, at number 4, we've come to one of our crucial missing characters, Sir Cadogan. I have already discussed the first introduction of this painting in a previous episode, but today we learn that he was tasked with replacing the Fat Lady. This is omitted from the movie, and perhaps they felt they just didn't have time to dive into Cadogan's antics, but I think he is great in the book. For those of you who don't know, Sir Cadogan helped guide Harry and his friends to the astronomy tower for their first class with Trelawney. But he has a tendency to be a bit extreme. For example, when he sees someone walking past him, he usually hurls insults at them and challenges them to a duel. Plus, we read in this chapter that after being put as the portrait guarding the entrance of the Gryffindor Tower, he changed the password at least twice a day, making it impossible for anyone to remember and often resulting in people getting locked out. Everyone was annoyed with him, but one thing is true, he was brave. We learn that no other paintings wanted to take the position, for fear of being attacked by Black. But Sir Cadogan and his fat gray pony were up for the job and volunteered. And man, I wish I could have had his full character in the movies. Don't worry though, we'll be covering his involvement even more in future episodes of this series, so stay tuned for that. Our next 2 changes for this week are 2 omissions. To condense things for the film, we miss out on a lot of seemingly random details that end up adding to the overall tension of the story or provide crucial context for later moments. The first of these 2 omissions is the fact that in the book, we learn that after Black's attack on the Fat Lady, Harry was followed everywhere by professors, and then he got an official warning. One day, Professor McGonagall summoned Harry to her office and in a very serious tone told him that Sirius Black is after him. However, she only kind of told Harry, as Harry cut her off halfway through her sentence and finished it for her. Harry explained that he had already overheard Mr. Weasley talking about it, so he already knew. At this, McGonagall was taken aback, but told Harry that he should understand then why she can't let him practice Quidditch anymore. Harry was outraged at this and told her that they're about to play Slytherin and he needs to practice. And as book fans know, McGonagall is very involved in Quidditch. After some thinking, she told Harry that he can practice, but he must be accompanied by Madam Hooch or another teacher. And that takes us into the second omitted moment I mentioned, which is their actual Quidditch practice that week. Oliver Wood was very frustrated as he informed the team that they would no longer be playing Slytherin that weekend, but Hufflepuff instead. Slytherin claimed that their seeker, Malfoy, was still recovering from his arm injury, which they all knew was bogus. The weather was horrible and the Slytherins just wanted to get out of playing and throw Gryffindor off their game. Fred and George tried to comfort Wood by telling him that Hufflepuff is easy to beat, but Wood says that they'll need to take it more seriously as Hufflepuff has a new captain, Cedric Diggory. We then learn that Cedric Diggory is bigger than a normal seeker and is pretty good. Plus, the girls on the team all giggled, saying that he's the good-looking one, a theme which we know will be carried into the next book and movie. But this isn't the last we'll hear about Cedric for today. Now moving on to change number 7, we head into Harry's defense against the dark arts class with Snape. We read in the book that in the following days, Wood followed Harry around everywhere, talking his ear off about Quidditch strategy and how to counter Cedric's playstyle. One day, he talked for so long that Harry suddenly realized he was 10 minutes late to class and ran to defense against the dark arts, which is our change, as in the movie, everyone is in class and Snape is the one who walks in late. But in the book, Harry runs in and starts to apologize, but then stops short as he looks up and sees Snape instead of Lupin at the head of the class. Snape then deducts points from Gryffindor for Harry being late, but Harry stands still and asks where Lupin is. This kind of segues into our next change, which is the fact that in the book, the whole class sort of rebels against Snape for a moment, as Snape insults Lupin, but the Gryffindors won't take it. Harry doesn't sit down, and keeps asking Snape so many questions that Snape deducts 5 more points from Gryffindor for Harry not obeying him. This is very different from the quiet and respectful Harry we see in the movie. "Excuse me, sir, where's Professor Lupin?" Yeah, no. In the book, Harry is like, "Where's Lupin? What's wrong with him?" the whole time, refusing to sit for Snape. Plus, Dean Thomas speaks up and says Lupin is the best teacher they've ever had, and Parvati Patil speaks up along with Hermione to tell Snape that they haven't gotten as far as werewolves yet. All of this contributes to Snape's bad mood by the time Hermione speaks up for the second time, and Snape calls her an insufferable know-it-all. However, there's a crucial change here, which is a short moment but speaks volumes to Ron's character in the book compared to the movie. In the movie, Ron says he's got a point, you know. But in the book, Ron stands up for Hermione despite having called Hermione a know-it-all many times, and he tells Snape, "You asked a question and she knows the answer. Why ask if you don't want to be told?" And after this comment, Snape gives Ron detention, which is that he has to clean out the hospital bedpans without magic. This is a big moment in my opinion, because in the book, Hermione and Ron have been at odds the whole year because of Scabbers and Crookshanks. But at the end of the day, Ron is still loyal and stands up for her. In the movie, he goes so far as to agree with Snape's insult, which to me is just insane. Even if Ron agreed in his mind, he would never agree with Snape out loud. But moving on, there's 2 more smaller mistakes during this class. First, Hermione doesn't just appear randomly. Again, I have covered this almost every week so far for this book, but Hermione was pretty good with the time turner and didn't just teleport places. That would be way too obvious. Of course, for the visual aspect of the movie, they wanted to make it ultra clear that she was up to something, but it just isn't book accurate. Second, the Gryffindors didn't have double DADA with other houses, so the Slytherins being in this class is wrong. Draco would have never been there, and therefore he never would have drawn a picture and sent it over to Harry. However, we do read that Draco would make comments out loud to annoy Harry, saying things like, "Oh, if only my arm was feeling better," as he would look out at the storm. And speaking of the storm and the Quidditch match, that brings us to the final part of our scenes for this week, as Harry heads into this game. Of course, as always in the books, we never cut straight to the game, which is the movie's first mistake with this section, as they cut out Harry's morning before the match. Harry woke up at about 4 a.m. to Peeves blowing in his ear, and after trying to go back to sleep and failing, he decided to just get up and go downstairs. As he opened up the dorm door, he felt something brush up against his leg and quickly bent down to grab Crookshanks before she could get Scabbers in the dorm. He then spent the morning sitting in the common room, keeping Crookshanks from going upstairs, and then eventually he went down to breakfast. Once again, the movie cuts out these seemingly small Crookshanks and Scabbers moments, which play a larger role later on, as we eventually learn that Crookshanks was working with Sirius to try to get Scabbers out of the castle. But again, that's more for a future episode. For now, we need to get to the game itself. After breakfast, Harry headed down to the pitch and went into the locker room, where Wood didn't even give his usual pep talk as he was so put off by the weather and the change of plans. The game started and things immediately were off to a rocky start, as we read that Harry literally couldn't see anything because of his glasses. They didn't have goggles like what we see in the movie. Nope, Harry had to get his glasses fixed another way, which is our next change. Wood in the book called a timeout, and during this timeout, Hermione ran into their huddle and quickly performed an impervious spell on Harry's glasses, which essentially made it impossible for rain to stick to them. Oliver was so happy at this that he could have kissed Hermione, and with this renewed energy, they resumed play and Harry finally was able to see. Which brings us to the next change, as the movie drastically changed the climax of this match. There are several changes regarding this chase and fall, but the first one is that Harry doesn't fly hundreds of feet into the air to chase the snitch. I could be wrong, but I think the snitch is like programmed to magically not go too far outside the confines of the Quidditch pitch. In the book, we read that by the time he fell, he was only about 50 feet up, which is still high, but not the 100+ feet that we see in the movie. We read that as he flew around, he saw the outline of the Grim in the clouds, so that's accurate to the movie, but then Wood yelled at him and he realized Diggory was chasing the snitch. He then darted after Cedric as fast as he could, but something strange began to happen, which brings us to the next change in this scene, as we read in the book that Harry looked down and saw about 100 Dementors on the field of the Quidditch pitch looking up at him. He felt the cold growing inside of him and began to hear the voice of his mother crying at Voldemort to show mercy, and then he blacked out. Obviously, the change here is that Harry isn't hundreds of feet up in the clouds when he encounters the Dementors. In fact, the Dementors don't even make it off the ground, and that's the biggest part of this change. Dementors can't fly. I know it sounds a bit crazy because the Dementors we see in the movie are so cool looking and have become a staple of the Harry Potter fandom. But in actuality, there's nothing that says they can fly. They simply hover a couple inches above the ground. However, no one actually sees the air beneath them, so technically they could be walking, but just walking so smoothly that it looks like they're floating. Hypothetically, one could argue that if they do float, they could fly. But J.K. Rowling makes it very clear that the 100 or so Dementors at this Quidditch match were on the ground, looking up at Harry, not floating right next to him. Now moving on to the next mistake with this climactic fall, in the movie, we see Dumbledore hold out his hand and perform a spell to slow Harry's descent. However, this is strange for a couple reasons. First, Dumbledore should always have his wand on him, so why not just use his wand here? And second, in the book, he does use his wand. Hermione tells Harry afterwards when they're in the hospital that Dumbledore came out on the field and not only held up his wand to slow Harry's fall, but he muttered a spell and some silvery light shot out of his wand to scare away the Dementors. This is the second time they've witnessed a Patronus charm in the book, and it'll be coming up here soon as Harry learns it in the following chapters. But in the movie, we don't see a wand and we don't see a Patronus. And finally, the last change the movie made for this match, and the last change for this week's episode, is the fact that in the book, we learn Diggory caught the snitch after Harry fell because he didn't see it happen, and then he actually tried to call off the game and have a rematch. This goes to show Cedric's kindness and fairness in everything, which is partially why he's a Hufflepuff. And this helps set up his character for the Goblet of Fire. Obviously in the movie, the Hufflepuff Seeker is a no-name, but I like that in the book we are already building out who Cedric is. It just makes you a little more attached to Cedric by the time you get to the next book. And now to wrap things up for this week, I don't have a change, but more like a fun fact, which is that the reason Oliver Wood isn't by Harry's bed in the hospital when he wakes up is because he's still crying in the showers about their loss. In the movie, I just assumed that they didn't get the actor for the movie and therefore didn't want to show him. But in the book, we actually learn that he couldn't bring himself to come see Harry yet because he was so upset about the loss. And on that note, that wraps up my thoughts for this week. And now it's your turn to talk. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below and rank these mistakes and changes from best to worst. As always, be sure to like and subscribe and check out the series playlist to catch up on any episodes you might have missed so far. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.